Welcome to the latest episode of The Hex with John Arnold, Armand Kafai, Daniel Robertson. Don't forget, give us a thumbs up, give us the like, subscribe. If you're listening on podcasts, give us a 5-star rating. It helps us a bunch. And we have got 6 topics for what is shaping up to be a huge week ahead of North American soccer. Let's get right into it. Tuesday, MLS teams officially get into competitive play with 6 two-leg CONCACAF Champions Cup ties over Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 2 All-MLS ties, and 3 MLS versus Central American club ties. Can't wait to be tuned in all week. John, Mr. CONCACAF, kick us off. Which tie are you most looking forward to?
I'm really looking forward to Real Salt Lake's trip to Herediano. Herediano, Costa Rican Big Three member, and they haven't lost since losing the second leg of the Costa Rican final, which they won on aggregate. So this is a team that's in great form. And beyond just being in great form, they've got a lot of players who are maybe familiar names to MLS sickos, familiar names to former U.S. national team fans, or current U.S. national team fans who remember some of the old days. Marcel Hernandez, the Cuban forward, is one of the guys who leads the line, but Alonso Hernandez, a former U.S. youth international who's from El Paso, also is on the team, also has been scoring goals. Alan Cruz, who used to play in MLS, is like an absolute standout player. I don't know why it didn't work in MLS, but he is absolutely pulling the strings. The only bit of a bummer is that Herediano is working on a huge stadium project, so they're not going to be in their normal home. But I think it'll still be a pretty good crowd, difficult place for Real Salt Lake to visit. And of course, as we'll get into on some of our MLS preview content, I'm not that sold on RSL this year either. So to me, that's the one I've got circled on potential upset watch. That's the one I'm looking forward to most. And I think there's going to be a lot of fun elements as people sort of turn on, think, oh yeah, I remember that guy. There's a lot of those cases. And I think that also can lead to a lot of, guys feeling like they're out for revenge or want to put themselves back in the MLS picture.
Yeah, and this is awkward because, they do say great minds think alike. And, John, that's exactly the match that I had picked as well, was Herediano versus RSL. And I thought it was off the grid. I didn't think anyone else was going to take this one. But
You should know me better. I mean, if it's off the grid, it's on my grid.
Yeah, no pun intended on all the grid talk for Real Salt Lake. But, no, I had this one circled because, frankly, I think it's the only one where the Central American team probably has a realistic chance. The other two, maybe Antigua, but let's be honest, probably not against the Sounders. And I'm also looking to see if I can add to that what Diego Luna has to offer. Coming off of the January camp, you feel like he's a player that, if he wants to take that next step, these are the types of games where he needs to go in and boss the game and say, I am above this level. I'm better than these teams. I should be dominating against a Central American side like Herediano. So, yeah, let's see what RSL has to offer. Armand, you're in the Whitecaps jersey. Is there a reason for that? Or what's the tie you're most looking forward to?
Well, it's just a random jersey I found in my closet, to be honest with you. There was no tie. There was no anything. Hilariously, I was also going to go RSL at one point, but then I changed my mind. Look, I'm looking forward to the Cold Weather Bowl, which there's potentially 2, right? SKC Miami, but I'm looking forward to the other one, LAFC Colorado. It may not be as, starstruck or as interesting or as sicko-based, but I'm interested to see, first off, this is going to be a game where everyone's going to be like, don't switch the schedule because it's going to be absolutely freezing outside in Commerce City. But I'm looking forward to see how the Rapids, who have kind of retooled themselves through MLS mechanisms, they just acquired Josh Atencio, they acquired Ted Cudi Pietro, butcher that name, etc.
That way harder than it needed to be.
Yeah, exactly. But they've retooled it. Yeah, exactly. They've retooled in a way that's very interesting to me. But also LAFC has as well, right? They got Mark Delgado. They got Nkosi Tafari.
They looked good against Club America.
They've been looking pretty good, and I am interested to see how that works. David Martinez, we've kind of talked about him, and I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a little bit more I want to add on LAFC later. But I just think that this is a little bit of an interesting game to see if Colorado had that really hot start to start the year. They're looking great. They're everyone's darling, and they just kind of tanked after Leagues Cup.
Well, and remember that they got bounced out of Leagues Cup in pretty embarrassing fashion by whom? By LAFC. So they're in a continental competition, an international competition again, and facing that same team that last time did them wrong. in the first leg, I do think that they really, really need to have a good result because in LA, everyone knows how difficult it is to play there. The last time that they played there in international competition, it didn't go so hot. So it's an interesting one. Maybe we'll talk a little more about it.
We're going to talk more about it right now because the two all MLS ties, we've got LAFC playing Colorado and we have Inter Miami playing Sporting Kansas City. Armand, as you alluded to, these are going to be the first legs are going to be really cold in both environments. But what we wanted to talk about was which team is under more pressure to win and has pretty much more to lose by losing between LAFC and Inter Miami, two of arguably the 3 or 4 biggest teams in the league. And Armand, curious to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I was going to go cliche Miami. Okay, they got Messi, they got all these guys, etc. But Miami also has another cup competition, right? They have the Club World Cup, and I think that is, like, they've never a chance to redeem themselves. This is LAFC's biggest, like, outside of MLS Cup competition. Absolutely. Like, there's just something that they've been, pursuing and pushing to win, and it kind of comes short year after year. For me, look, with Cherundolo's experience now dealing with the Triple C at this point and all these storylines, like, I think that LAFC has a lot more pressure than Miami. Now, look, Miami, obviously their goal is, okay, win trophies. Okay, but they won the Supporters' Shield. They obviously want to win more. They'll have a chance to win Club World Cup, etc. If you think that's even realistic, they have a chance. But for me,
both of our faces just immediately went to skepticism.
But there's a point. Miami will be judged more by their performance in Club World Cup than they will be in CONCACAF Champions League. John, would you agree?
Maybe, but it doesn't change the fact that if they don't get out of the first round of this competition, when they draw an MLS team and everyone's like, oh, it's just another MLS team and not even a good one at that. If you don't get out of this round, I think it's a colossal failure. I think the pressure's on them. The one thing I was going to say, like, it's kind of sports group think that maybe isn't true. Like, oh, well, they're running their mouths. They better get out. They don't really run their mouths, right? They never really talk. Messi never gives an interview.
Yeah.
I just think that they do have that gravitas for who they are, what they've achieved in the past. And everyone knows that the expectation is to win trophies. I do think that I don't know how much last year affects this year, but I do think that last year was a big disappointment where you come up against a Mexican team for the first time in this much more fair competition than Leagues Cup, where all the games are played on U.S. soil or Canadian soil as well.
And get dismantled.
And they failed. They really struggled. And I think that kind of, it's difficult to remove that thorn in your side if you say, oh, well, that last time we played a Mexican team, it didn't go well. If you don't get to do it again, I think you can still have plenty of haters and doubters saying, well, you didn't even get there. So I really do think the pressure is more on, maybe not necessarily this week. You can read the Franco Panizzo tweet saying that maybe Messi won't even play in the first leg. I was actually thinking, because everyone penciled them in, that they're going to go to Jamaica, play Cavalier, and maybe they do. What if he doesn't play in that first leg, right? I think you could do that and say, oh, well, we're going to win by so much in Fort Lauderdale. It doesn't even matter if our big stars are there in the first legs. I don't know. I hope not, because it's a competition I like and care about, but I also can't blame anyone for not wanting to go outside in 6 degrees. It's like 40 here and I've got my chunky sweater on. So I think the pressure's on Inter Miami way more than LAFC, because if LAFC gets bounced, yes, they don't have another competition they can fall back on, but at the same time, I think that fans understand and sort of have not less expectation necessarily for LAFC, but I think the goal is to get back to MLS Cup.
I don't agree with that. I'm on Armand's side here. I don't agree with you, John, because I think that when you look at the fans for LAFC fans are judging themselves based on how they do against Liga MX. In Los Angeles, they're judged by how do you do against teams in Liga MX. Whereas
so what is Inter Miami judging themselves?
I think Inter
Miami fans are more Man City.
No, yes, I think Inter Miami fans are much more interested in how they would shape
MLS Cup first, man, which LAFC has done.
I hear what you're saying, but I think that they are way more concerned with how would they shape up against a River Plate or a Boca or teams in Europe. I don't think, I don't think Liga MX is quite as popular in Miami as it is in other places around the country. True. And I think that Inter Miami is going to have that circled. Whereas, as Armand said, if LAFC doesn't perform and if they lose to the Rapids, they really don't have that much going. And LAFC has won MLS Cup. They've won Open Cup. They've won Supporter Shield. This is the only thing they haven't won. So if they were to win this, you look at it and say the cycle is complete here. Cherundolo has won everything. LAFC has won everything. And I realize I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, but think about this too. LAFC, and I know Miami is in the same boat. They're not going to have to play a Mexican team until the semifinals. So if you get past this round, there's a clear path for you there.
Yeah, I think like the kind of like distinction I feel like I'm making is that I think it's more embarrassing for Miami to get eliminated in the first round. And okay, yeah, you have another competition where you could bounce back, but like, how is that going to look versus LAFC, where I think you can kind of craft that and say, we're going to focus on other things. And yes, I think there is a desire to get this international trophy, and there is a clear path there. But to me, it would be a bigger failure if Miami doesn't get out of this round. And maybe that's just me not respecting SKC and having a little bit of respect for the Rapids.
You're the only one.
If that's the case, so be it, man. I just think that it would be more embarrassing for Inter Miami if they can't get out of this. If Messi doesn't show up in Kansas City, if some other guys don't show up in Kansas City or don't play, you do have a built-in excuse. So maybe there's a little bit of a difference there. But to me, Inter Miami has to get out of this tie. LAFC probably does too, but I think the pressure's on Miami.
How crazy is this, though? If Miami gets all the way to the final, do you know how many days are between the CONCACAF Champions Cup final and the Club World Cup opening game? 13 days. 13 days between the CCC final and the Club World Cup. Could you imagine Inter Miami basically playing 2 matches a week for pretty much between February and August?
To be fair, they'd be crazy, but they have a deep team for it. Like, they actually have built out some depth, whereas you look at like the Leagues Cup run when Messi arrived, boom, they win the Leagues Cup, and they just didn't have the legs, didn't have the gas to actually get into the MLS playoffs. This time they kind of do. I mean, in theory, look, you should set a bar this high. You should be like, praise to LAFC, praise to Inter Miami for us even having this discussion. Hey, is the pressure on? We're not talking that way about Sporting Kansas City. We're not talking that way about the Colorado Rapids. It's a good problem to have. These are quite literally champagne problems. So props to them on that. But for me, gotta be Miami.
When we recover from Triple C fever midweek, we get into the MLS regular season kicking off on Saturday, 1:30 p.m. Central Time, with Inter Miami hosting NYCFC, and then a slew of games throughout the weekend. And by the way, shout out to MLS for doing what we have suggested and actually staggering the games. You can watch 6 games on Saturday, or between Saturday and Sunday, which is great. But we want to get into predictions, and we are going to do the Conference champions, MLS Cup winner, and MLS MVP, the Landon Donovan MLS MVP. Let's get it right there. Armand, let's throw it down to you here. I want to start off with your Conference champions and MLS Cup winner.
Oh, damn, we're jumping right into this.
We're jumping right into it.
Fuck, okay, well.
What do you think it was going to be? It was on the document.
Yeah, I know it was up, but we're jumping. I thought it'd be like West.
First game of the season. Let me hear who you think is going to win on Saturday.
We're gonna jump into it, but no. In the West, I've been kind of boosting them quite a bit. I've been very impressed by LAFC's additions. I've been very impressed by some of the games that they've been playing. They have an open DP spot. Looks like they were kind of keeping that warm for Griezmann. I think personally, like it's kind of setting up where
you have to take that into account, right?
Yeah, like, you have to think about it when you think about MLS Cup winner, or Western Conference winner, excuse me. But I think that they've again retooled it in a proper way. It looks like they're continually adding on pieces. They have a little more flexibility because I'm sure they're selecting the 2+4 model, which gives them a little bit more allocation money to spend to help improve the roster in some capacity. But for me, I just think Denny Bouanga has had a little bit of disrespect. I think Olivier Giroud is gonna come back in a little bit better form than what he has been. He came in the middle of the year.
It's a low bar to clear.
He came in the middle of the year. Players have to have time to acclimate in. So I think you do that. Worst case, they have Jeremy Abobasi, who's been excellent. That can fill that role perfectly fine. So I don't think it would be an issue regardless. You have David Martinez, the high upside young player that I've continued to talk about. Again, Mark Delgado, Aaron Long, who's looked pretty good in preseason.
You're just listing players now. Yeah. Is this your pick?
Yes.
That's my pick. Who is your pick for the East?
That's tough. That's
why we're talking about it.
It's Cincinnati for me, guys. I think that they've built out has been absolutely fantastic. Once this Evander deal goes through, we can officially talk about it and whatnot. But I think Evander is an upgrade on Acosta. We kind of talked about that on last week's episode. They have Kevin Denke up top. They won't be dead at center back like they were for the entire year last year, and they had a very good defense prior to that. I think Pat Noonan, again, has the squad assembled, and I think we're looking at an LAFC Cincinnati final, especially with, again, like, I'm not sold on Miami going all the way. I think there'll be some sort of fatigue. They have older guys coming through as well. Columbus, there's question marks there with their players that they're going to have to replace. Atlanta, how they're all going to get together. So for me, I'm seeing an LAFC Cincy final, and I think within that, I see LAFC taking the crown, especially with the potential of offseason additions, but especially with the potential. I'm kind of accounting for this. It's almost an open secret, but Griezmann as well. I think Griezmann's still an excellent player.
You would put them over the top. John?
For me, it's LAFC Cincy with LAFC winning it.
I've got LAFC in the West as well for a lot of the same reasons that Armand mentioned. In the East, I desperately wanted to pick against Inter Miami. Not because I'm a hater. I think it's a fun club, actually. I'm skeptical of Javier Mascherano. I do think that this team has a lot of question marks in the manager books. And but at the same time, I feel like it kind of is going to run itself. I'm not totally buying in on Cincinnati, unlike Armand, who I think is frozen right now. I'm not totally buying in. Oh, he's back. I'm not totally buying in on Atlanta United, although I think they're going to be much better. So I ended up picking Inter Miami as just sort of like an inertia pick, but I think Inter Miami probably falls in the final to the Seattle Sounders. Maybe in a Club World Cup final rematch. I actually have no idea if that could actually happen, but no, I think the Sounders are going to generate steam. I like their moves in the offseason. I think they've gotten better in a smart, and I was going to say sharp and smart, and I kind of got stuck in between. In a Schmetz way, maybe. But truly, I do think that Brian Schmetzer's influence and just like that calming hand is pretty critical. They've always been a team that gets better as the season goes on. They kind of hit the Jets in the summer. I feel like it's lock-in focus right now in Club World Cup, so I don't think they'll win the Supporters' Shield. I don't think they'll win the West, but I do think that they're going to be the team that's playing best in September, October, November. That's usually the team that lifts the trophy. So I got the Sounders winning it over Inter Miami in a pretty fun final.
I got one from each of you guys. We're agreeing quite a bit here again today. Armand, I'm with you on Cincinnati. I think that they've got the highest. If Denke works out, that's kind of the big question mark. They've got a very high ceiling because if Denke works out, the one question on them though is Luca Oriano going to be here through the whole season? Because if they sell him in the middle of the year, that could be an issue. But you do trust Cincinnati to like improve themselves. The other thing on Cincinnati is I think they have three center backs that may be better than any center back on about half of the MLS rosters between Hadibi, Miles Robinson, and Matt Miazga. Like they've definitely got three better center backs than FC Dallas has. And so I think a lot of MLS teams, I don't know why FC Dallas is catching strays here, but yes.
I know why they are.
I do too. But yeah, if the Evander move goes through, yes, I like Cincinnati. And also I like that they're not playing in as many competitions. I think they can be really fresh towards the end of the season and they've got more depth. And then in the West, Seattle Sounders making it to MLS Cup. My worry again is that they peak maybe a little bit too early with CONCACAF Champions Cup. Fade them in Leagues Cup. I don't think they are going to be trying in Leagues Cup at all. I think they want that time off. They would give that spot to FC Dallas right now if they'd take it, I think.
For allocation money?
For allocation money, yes. They're selling
international spots for allocation money. Please take our Leagues Cup spot.
That should have gone in the Ferreira trade.
Dan Hunt said he wanted to be in Leagues Cup. So I mean,
they should have put it that. That would be amazing. An international spot, and it's actually an international competition spot. Enjoy.
So I'm Sounders to MLS Cup and then FC Cincinnati to win it. I think they have all of the experience.
You're all in on the Sounders.
Look, as John said,
they're all in on Cincinnati.
They're built to win, and these are two coaches that know the league really well, and it feels like this is the year. Like if it doesn't work after this year, it might start going down for these teams. So that's going to be my final, and then FC Cincinnati to win it. MVP, Evander. If you're going to take FC Cincinnati, you got to go with Evander. Armand, I know that's your pick. I don't even need to say it. John?
Lionel Messi. He won last year despite playing not very many games. I think that even if we sickos on the Hex and people who listen to the show who love the league say, well, it should be Evander, it should be Denny Wonga, it'll be Messi. I mean, look, I'm a voter, So I guess I have a little bit of control.
Wow.
But
Is he going to be thinking this when he's writing down his vote?
Yeah. Well, no, that.
Who
But
was your ballot last year?
Continuing on with MLS, it starts this weekend, of course, and there are many storylines this year. I feel like you can find something pretty interesting with almost every team. There's only a few teams I look at, and I'm like, yeah, this doesn't really do much for me. So I asked each of you guys, let's pick one storyline that you are following really closely this year. And I will kick us off with this one. And for me, it is going to be Jesus Ferreira and how he does in Seattle, because there's just so many layers to the Jesus Ferreira story. And obviously, we're all based in Dallas and have been around him since he was a kid, practically. And he's finally leaving Dallas. But this is the first time, I guess you could say Kellen Acosta maybe, but this is the first time a jewel from the academy has been transferred inside of MLS to this level. And usually when they would send players, it'd be like abroad. And it's like, oh, okay, well, he didn't really work there. Like Reggie Cannon, we were all bummed. It didn't go great for him, maybe a little bit out of his control. He comes back to MLS, but it feels different, him coming back, going to Colorado. This is a direct trade of one of your jewels of your academy to a rival, right? And so that's interesting because I think it tells a story of, did FC Dallas make the right decision or the wrong decision? But then with Ferreira as a player himself, he started a World Cup game. Right now, his stock is very low. Can he get his stock back? He only just turned 24. If he does well in Seattle, he's going to be probably in Europe, hopefully next season. Is he going to play in Club World Cup or Gold Cup? I would assume Club World Cup. That's going to be, we've mentioned on this show that's a question. John nods that it'll be Club World Cup. I would tend to agree. But he is there's just so many layers to his performance. If he does well, if he scores 15 goals, the Sounders are an MLS Cup favorite. If he doesn't, boy, they may have to go into the transfer market to find a forward this summer. A lot of questions there for Jesus Ferreira. John, what's your storyline you are looking at closely?
I wrote down familiar manager rebuilds. So last week I talked about my belief in the U.S. National team managers with their new jobs. Greg Berhalter in Chicago, Bruce Arena in San Jose. Whether it works or not, I think it's going to be extremely interesting to watch that storyline. But I've also written down Ronny Deila at Atlanta United. We know him. He won MLS Cup. He left up and down, mostly good. Now he's at the helm of this big rebuild for a club that has huge expectations and a good roster. Nico Estevez at Austin. Nico is a guy who coached FC Dallas, was assistant with the U.S., familiar manager. He's trying to rebuild Austin, and they spent a lot of money to try and make that team better. And Robin Fraser, right? Another team that's really trying to turn things around. A guy that MLS fans know well. I don't think all those guys are going to succeed, but I think they're all in interesting positions, and that's going to be a great storyline to watch as the year goes on.
John, I think people forget, by the way, about Bruce Arenas. I was doing some research for my other project with around betting and Bet MLS. People forget, I think, Bruce Arena did not get fired from New England for anything performance related, and they had only lost. He was very good with New England.
Great. They were fantastic. Like they won a Supporters Shield. They were great.
And their record was incredible. And as I just from this weekend with San Jose playing RSL, San Jose was like the underdog when the line opened. And it's at home. And I was thinking, are people forgetting that there's one thing Bruce Arena knows how to do really, really well, and that's not lose MLS games? Armand, where are you looking?
I'm really intrigued by Columbus, guys. Look, they just sold off Cucho. They sold Christian Ramirez. Those are two of their big three in the front line. They haven't replaced those guys yet. And if they get a replacement, let's say they get one from international, it's going to take them a little bit while to get acclimated. There's Triple C going on. They have Leagues Cup. You're missing these guys, and right now you're starting forward is Jason Russell Rowe, which all due respect to him, he's a fantastic player, but there's definitely a drop-off from Cucho Hernandez, and I would even say Christian Ramirez as a whole. Diego Rossi is going to have to take a lot bigger responsibility as a part of the whole on the offensive side. For me, they have no signings in place. Are they going to make these moves certain times? Do they trust these guys? And how is Wilfred Nancy going to adjust to this? We have a lot of belief in them, and the fact that we're not even talking about them as much shows that we have belief in their organization as a whole. But there's still holes missing. They could announce they signed someone maybe tomorrow or something, but they still won't be ready for the first weeks of the season, even though we do know that the first weeks of MLS season don't really matter as much in the grand scheme of things. But to me, it's still something really interesting to see is how they retool from this kind of, I wouldn't say rebuild, but mini retooling of sorts after selling probably one of the best players in the league by far.
Yeah, because I think that you're thinking differently about Columbus if they sell Cucho January 5th compared to February 5th or
Absolutely.
whenever it
Correct.
was. And I think that's part of, like, if you're a Crew fan, even though maybe you saw the writing on the wall that this guy wants to go back to Europe eventually, when the calendar, you tear off your old school calendar that everyone has, obviously, tear off the January page and it says February, you're like, oh, cool, Cucho's still here. Like, this is going to be a great season. But maybe not, right? Like, I think that you're totally right that we give them a lot of the benefit of the doubt because they're Columbus, because Wilfred's still there. There's another guy with consistent European interest and probably a desire to go there. If he's gone in the summer, I think you see a team that goes from, oh yeah, I think they're still contenders, even if they make, especially if they make a move, to, uh-oh.
Yeah,
and one thing, sorry, throw it down, but one thing that I want to mention, this is Issa Tol's like another first big decision for him is how is he going to replace Cucho Hernandez? And that's a big hole to replace.
I trust them though, dude. But I trust Columbus, and you said that it will take some time for whoever they sign. It will take some time. We don't know that that's the case because the last two times they hit it immediately in Rossi and Cucho. They didn't take a freaking week. Now, obviously, Rossi already had his history within the league. But if there's any team I trust to find a plug-and-play option, it's going to be the Columbus Crew. Though, yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And I think it is interesting as well, as we were talking Triple C earlier. We were talking, if LAFC loses to Colorado, well, who does LAFC play if they beat Colorado? They got to go through Columbus, and that's far from a foregone conclusion.
That's their boogeyman.
Right, and that's their boogeyman. So, yeah, so many interesting storylines, especially early in the season. Just can't wait to get things going. We talked about our year-long storylines that we're looking forward to, but there are more than a dozen MLS games this weekend, and as I mentioned earlier, you can watch most of them without interruption. Thank you. Well, not most of them, but more than you could have in the past. Thank you, MLS. So, Armand, which match are you most looking forward to this weekend?
Well, outside of the one I'm going to Houston, Dallas.
Look, I'm going to an MLS match.
Damn, I know that was a crazy thing to do on a soccer-based podcast in America. But the game that I'm watching for, I want to kind of stray away from the obvious picks. I'm going Chicago Columbus.
Yeah.
Like again, that's Berhalter's return to Columbus, if I'm looking at this correctly, and how they face up against Nancy. Like this is again, I just talked about Columbus and the holes that they're gonna be there in week one. I mean, they're not gonna sign someone to have them plug and play unless they sign from the league and he just magically shows up. But again, Chicago's made some interesting signings. They signed Jack Elliott. They signed Jonathan Bamba. They have their youngster Brian Gutierrez. What's up?
Oh, I thought we were just gonna say big signing after everyone.
Brian Gutierrez has been a young kind of shining star, and like again, you also have Ugo Kuipers, who's getting his second year in the league, and his advanced numbers in Belgium were great. Even in MLS play, they weren't that bad, and he struggled kind of at the in the year, but before kind of picking it up a little bit. I'm interested to see how they actually do play and how Berhalter sets up against guys like Nancy. Like, remember, we talked about, how is Nancy going to replace Berhalter, etc., blah, 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 all that stuff. But I'm really interested to see how Berhalter, in his first, coming back to MLS, how he sets up and how they play against Columbus and what is a homecoming for Berhalter as a whole.
Yeah, that was one that I was actually looking at because Chicago is plus 500 in that match, which I was thinking, that's a little interesting. I'm actually going to be having my eyes down. I guess north of where you'll be, Armand, but not too far north of where you'll be in Austin. Austin is going to be hosting Sporting Kansas City this weekend, and I think this is one that, not many people are going to be circling on their calendars. But for me, as someone who on the show last week, I picked Austin to finish second in the West. This to me is a game that shows, okay, Austin, are you serious? Like, are you actually serious? Because you made these signings, you spent all the money, you've gotten your attacking talent in there, you've gotten the coach in there that I think we all think very highly of. You're playing a Sporting Kansas City team in between CONCACAF Champions Cup games, and I think they'll get a decent result on Tuesday, maybe a 0-0 even. They'll be focused on the game against Inter Miami. Okay, what should Austin be doing in this match? They should beat them 3-0. It should not be close. If this is if Austin is a team that says we spent $25 million in this offseason and we want to compete, well, you need to go out and beat Sporting Kansas City because, as you said, Armand, most of these games probably don't really matter that much. We're looking for, kind of along the lines of what you're saying, is Chicago for real? Well, boy, they can show it in week one. I want to see, is Austin FC serious this year? And I feel like a good performance in week one would show that.
Give me DC United against Toronto. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I was about to say, damn, man, that's crazy.
Please.
That's crazy. Get your eyes away
man,
from
every
that game.
point matters to those teams. If they can get above 20, that
might be the worst game of the week. All due respect to both those guys.
My legitimate pick is Cincy Red Bulls. Obviously, Cincy's still kind of figuring out the transition. You guys think they're going to win MLS Cup. I'm not so convinced. And a team that made the MLS Cup final last year is the New York Red Bulls. I think that they're a better team at the back. I'm really interested in, talk about another narrative like Chapo Mouteng. I don't think is a great signing, but he's been good in preseason and the early returns are positive. So I'm fascinated to see how that works. I do think look, the system is so powerful that maybe it matters, but I think the attack is going to be a question mark for me for New York for a lot of the year, but they've got a shot against a pretty good Cincinnati defense to kind of make a statement as well. So I think that to me is an interesting mix where you look at the Cincy in transition with big expectations versus the team that actually was the Eastern Conference representative in MLS Cup final last year, but obviously can't just play like they did all last season if they want to kind of get back to those same heights. So I think that'll be an interesting one. And I usually don't pick an Eastern Conference game. So week one, fresh season, anything can happen. But I mean, with the time zone stuff and these earlier games now, Daniel, you've been loving on, it's going to be way easier to actually watch some opposite conference games. I've typically focused on the West, but when those Toronto games used to be on at noon every week, yeah, I watched a lot of Toronto, right? So I am looking forward to that as well, even though I picked a night game.
Rounding us out this week, we're going to look at the USL, who announced it is launching a Division One league in 2027-28. I'm a little bit fuzzy on this one. What does this exactly even mean? Are they saying they're going to compete with MLS? Are they going to be taking international competition places? Armand, what does this mean?
Well, it means that they're at least trying to gun for the same level of sanctioning as MLS, right? Which it comes with a lot of things that I'm a little not sure how they're going to get to these certain benchmarks. For example, each stadium needs to be around 15,000 people. I mean, look at the team that's coming up in Garland, Texas. They're planning for a 10,000 seat stadium. Obviously, not all teams are going to be in that top USL, that top USL league, but it seems like they're looking to compete with MLS. I mean, and to me, it's a bit of an interesting thing because I kind of liked where they were in the soccer ecosystem right now. I think they had a very good spot, and it seemed like they were getting a lot more traction too. I mean, it looked like a lot of minor league baseball investors were looking to actually pivot their investments into USL and second division soccer because of that. But it seems like they kind of want to go for it. But look, I don't get it, but I like it. I think competition is good for all. I think for everything. Right. It's not my money. I'm not losing anything in this. So I'm all for a competitive aspect in that regard. And if that says, hey, we're also gonna have a promotion relegation system as well too within that, then okay, it's gonna be probably more widely available than MLS season pass, which is behind the Apple TV paywall. Why are they looking at me like I'm crazy? They have a deal with CBS. Their final was more available than. And cool. It had more. Cool, viewers.
But they're announcing Jurgen Damm. Oakland Roots is announcing Jurgen Damm as a marquee signing, and New Mexico United is announcing Gideon Zalalem as a marquee signing, and those players wouldn't make MLS teams. John, what's kind of your reaction to this?
No, I think first of all, it's worth noting that this is not essentially new in the USL ecosystem. We were all at the Dallas Trinity this weekend. The USL Super League is sanctioned at the same level as the NWSL. But as much as I love going to a Trinity game, as much fun as I had hanging out with you guys and my son and some other friends last night.
Don't forget Boots.
Boots, the mascot, yes. It doesn't feel like it's at the same level as when you go to a Gotham FC game or Portland Thorns game. So, I think that overall, it's an interesting move. And I do agree with this idea that seems to be driving the move, which is, hey, there's enough big time cities in the U.S. for big soccer to work in more places, right? Phoenix, Memphis, Sacramento. There are these markets where there are other big teams or people that are really interested in the sport or that have worked for minor league baseball for a long time where MLS isn't going to go. But I do have some serious questions about, yes, meeting the sanctioning, like Armand brought up with the stadium size and those sorts of variables. And I think also, it's going to be a big fight to convince people that it's quote unquote big league, because I think MLS is already fighting and sometimes losing those battles in certain markets. Dallas, Colorado, sometimes Chicago, some of these places feel sometimes like they're fighting against a minor league perception, whether that perception is reality or not. So when it's USL, where people, if they know of it, already know of it as a minor league, even though that's not how they want to be referred to, I think it's a really, really difficult it's difficult to get people to break out of those perceptions they already have. So I think the way that they launch this to the non-soccer nerds, the way that they market this in those markets that they're trying to target, is going to make a huge, huge difference as to whether or not this is a total success, and we're all talking about it as something that worked in a couple years, or if it's a big misstep. Because I do agree, Armand, that like right now the USL seems to fit a great purpose. I like the way that it's run. I like the markets they're in. I think there's a ton of passion, a ton of great energy from ownership groups, from fans, from players. So you have to make sure you don't lose that momentum in trying to take this big jump. I wish them the best. I would love to see something big and ambitious work out, but I think there's a lot of questions that we don't quite have the answers to yet.
I think the big thing you nailed, Armand, is the stadium situation. And I think when we look at USL and they're saying, okay, we're first division now and this and that, okay, you can improve teams on the field pretty quickly. Okay, let's say Saudi money comes into USL and they could suddenly make teams great. Okay, that can happen quickly. What would you guys say is probably the worst, we're not trying to give anyone strays, but what's the worst stadium situation in MLS from a small kind of maybe not embarrassing, but like, what would be the worst stadium situation in MLS?
Colorado.
Okay.
Colorado.
They are better than the best. They are better than the best stadium situation in USL. So how do you solve that when you have 30 stadiums in MLS that are better than
Louisville is pretty good.
Okay, situation. Sure. You got a point there, Louisville. But the point remains. There's probably
it's heavily dependent on market too, right? It's heavily dependent on who's the ownership group. What is the market like? How many other sports are in there? What do you have to fight against? Is it a university town? Can you play games on Saturday night when the college football team is playing? There's so many factors that are so market dependent, and they're going to run into that even more than MLS does. And MLS does have to deal with those factors. They're going to run into that even more and have to really navigate those waters. I mean, I guess that's what I'm trying to communicate. Like, I am not ready to say, I don't have enough information yet to say like good decision to go D1 or bad decision to go D1. I just think that like you look at individual cases and you can kind of make an argument, you can kind of make whatever argument you want, right? Yeah. Oh my gosh, it totally works in Louisville. Oh my gosh, it's a total disaster in Fresno. What's the actual average, right? I don't know.
It's there's a couple teams I think we keep mentioning Louisville because again, they're one of the teams I think like I don't think
they do have an NWSL team.
Yeah,
like they
correct.
do have
they could exactly. They have, but like how many Louisville cities do you have within USL? I don't think it's like as many. It's exactly. It's like one or maybe two if it's like Sacramento, maybe.
Who MLS actually did not started to do a expansion to and then said maybe
and then
not.
Said no because the ownership was just like the owner group was just kind of weird with the money. I think. Look, like their best case scenario is what happens with every other league when there's a competitor, right? Like they'll absorb one or two teams and then call it a day and go from there. I think, though, the idea is ambitious. I'm just interested to see how it's going to work because they also said in the release that they don't want to flip their schedule. They want to stick to the March to December thing, which would be different than what MLS would do if MLS flipped the schedule. Now they're filling in that summer soccer gap. And then it gets a little bit interesting, right? So I think as a whole, I'm interested to see the idea. I just don't know how they're going to get the sanctioning. And remember, like,
I think MLS is laughing, though, dude. I think MLS is laughing to say, all right, how many stadiums are we going to have that have 35, 40,000 people this weekend to open the season? And
like, dude, I do have to say, like, I don't want another soccer wars, which is what it seems like we're shaping up for, right? We just saw the lawsuit with the MLS NASL thing. NASL, I was around enough to like have covered some of their games and interviewed some of the owners and players, and it just wasn't necessarily what I think USL is now, which is like a really good situation for a lot of people around the game. And I think like the game suffers in this country and maybe all countries when like we get more ego involved and more fighting.
Yes.
A rising tide certainly. We're still definitely at the point in soccer life in the U.S. where a rising tide still lifts all boats. I think that's true in media. I think that's true in leagues. I think that's true in club competitions. And I think like we're starting to see that kind of collaborative spirit die in U.S. soccer, I feel like, where there's like beef between, like NWSL, MLS. Why don't they work together more? It's ego and it's marketing goals and it's these things. And like, but I just think if you could have more collaboration, it would be even better for the sport, for developing great players. So I hope that this move doesn't have people kind of like beefing and laughing and fighting, because I think there's a lot of space for us to work together to make the sport better.
Well said, John. Well said. Well, next week we are going to have actual games to analyze competitive matches. So looking forward to it. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next week on The Hex.